good friend Annie Machon on the air with us today. AnnieMachon.com. The book, Spies, Lies, and Whistleblowers. You can probably find it out there. You should try to read this if you can. Annie, any works on a new book?
That's my autumn project, as my grandfather used to call it.
Okay, if you don't...
No, at some point I'll sit down and write the story of the story, what it was like to go on the run and all that sort of thing. So yeah. I will get around to it at some point.
That's a spy thriller, man, right there. From a real spy, by the way.
Absolutely. Going on the run. Gamekeeper turned poacher.
That would make a good movie. Maybe a little
You
better.
would think so, wouldn't you? Yeah. Maybe. If there are any filmmakers listening to this.
Maybe better than Tom Clancy or your... Frederick Forsyth, who I had on the show once, and I had mentioned, I started talking to him, the spy novel hero in England, I guess. Mm-hmm. I asked him about David Shaler. He got very upset with me. He didn't like me bringing his name up, and this is before all the latest developments there.
Yeah.
We were talking about Alexander Litvenko, and yes, it is likely that he was killed with radiological poisoning. He was the former KGB FSB counterterrorist officer, author of Blowing Up Russia, which was probably the real account of 1999's false flag apartment bombing campaign that anchored the authority for yet unelected Vladimir Putin, Pooty Poot. But it could have been something else. I don't know if you've ever seen this. He wrote a story just a few months before his death, that being Alexander Litvenko, called The Kremlin Pedophile. This, of course, was kicked off when Vladimir Putin, he couldn't help himself. He picked up a 5-year-old boy and started kissing him on the belly, this strange child out on the street. We all saw the pictures, and he went into some background information that includes the scrubbing, that is when Putin did become FSB director and then ultimately president, that he got rid of all of this information that allegedly they had on him, that he was indeed a pedophile. I mean, that might have been something that might have upset Mr. Putin enough to kill him.
Yeah, I don't think he'd be too chuffed with that accusation.
No.
I suppose the Russians do have a sort of noble history of airbrushing people out with photographs and things, so who knows?
Yeah, well, here in the United States, I think if I had a nickel for every time Bush was called a pedophile, I wouldn't even have to work anymore, I guess. It's a different situation than Russia, I assume. But, I mean, this is how far people will go, certainly, to cover their tracks. David Kelly, did we ever find out what really happened to him? And in light of this huge bird flu, pig flu pandemic, biological scientists dying, of course, his work to outline what Tony Blair and George Bush were trying to do to go into the war in Iraq. Did we ever find out what truly happened to him? Has there ever been any disclosure, anything else that we didn't hear?
Well, there's certainly been some developments, but no, we've never found out one way or the other what really happened to him, because, of course, there was supposed to be what's called a coroner's inquest in the UK into his death, and they've never had a proper one. And now we've had about 13 senior doctors and surgeons banding together and writing to the government saying he could not have killed himself in the way that he was supposed to have done. By cutting the ulnar artery in the way it did, it would have closed up within a couple of minutes. So medical opinion is questioning the actual method of suicide. And we also have a very good MP called Norman Baker, who is a Liberal Democrat member of Parliament, who is a real pain in the butt to the authorities. He keeps asking awkward questions. And he's done a lot of research into this and wrote a book about it, in fact. And his conclusion is that he is convinced that Kelly was murdered. It's just the question of by whom. One of the views he took was it might well have been the Iraqi Secret Service. But interestingly, there's been some more stuff in the news recently saying that soon after Kelly's body was found, some guys from MI5 turned up at his house and took all his computers and all his files and everything, because the suspicion was that he was writing his memoirs.
Yeah, what would the Iraqi security services have to gain from it? This is after the regime change, and maybe in some kind of a coordination there with MI6, or what would they have to gain from killing David Kelly?
I'm not sure. I mean, when I read that, I was slightly sort of perplexed by it as well, because, I mean, all sorts of other people had a lot more to gain by his murder. I mean, this is a theory that Norman Baker put forward. I suppose one could say that perhaps that Kelly was the world's expert on biological warfare. Perhaps he'd found something, or they thought he'd found something, he was sitting on it, but I honestly don't know. I mean, Norman Baker wrote a very good book about it, so I can't... Well, I mean,
I always thought, it had something to do with that. We've got a new book out, I don't know if you've had a chance to read it, called Dr. Mary's Monkey. This ties in some of the people in the JFK assassination, including Oswald himself, David Ferrie, and others, into these experiments, these biological experiments to create a biological weapon to use as an assassination tool. It also covered up, unfortunately, the tainted polio vaccines, of which so many Americans took, and they surmised caused cancer and later AIDS. So these really deadly experiments that these biologists work on, not something that the authorities want them out talking about.
Well, no. I mean, whether it's malign or it's just because people are trying to rush medicines onto the market, a bit like the thalidomide scandal, of course. There's no doubt that ill-thought-out procedures are offered to the public before they're fully tested.
Sure. Yeah. Don't look the other way, folks. There's a 9/12 coming now. Don't pay attention to that. Whatever you do, or the economy. Speaking of which, I mean, it seems to me that the time is right for another 9/11 or another 7/7 bombing. I mean, the people are very upset, as we talked about earlier. They need almost another distraction to take your eye off the ball, because people are zeroing in on what these guys are saying, their open hypocrisy, their lies, their cover-ups. It seems to me that if there was a time to have a sequel to a 9/11, this would be it.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be surprised if something happens and it's blamed on the Iranians, let's face it. I suppose the other thing would be some sort of terrorism attack, on the internet, so it brings down certain infrastructure or support of one of our countries. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because, of course, rumours are out there that the Patriot Act is waiting on the blocks and will be introduced as soon as something happens.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a rumor. I carried a story, somebody very close, to the government says it's there. So I guess...
It wouldn't surprise me. Surprise me.
Yeah, I mean, they had the Patriot Act basically written before 9/11 as well. So,
yeah.
And the worst thing about, and you really nailed it, I think, with that. That's a good prediction, and I'm kind of with you on that. An terror attack. Kind of hard for us to prove that it even happened. We'll just have to take their word for it, I guess, right?